Is 1997 the most important year in wrestling? In many ways, I think it is. While the WWF wasn't making millions of dollars or winning the promotional war, it was when fortunes turned around because the product itself got so good. The mid-90s cartoon era was done. It was time to get serious. It's why so many people cite it as their favorite 12-month period too, and here's 10 reasons as to why that was when you sit down and binge watch the whole thing. Number 10, the changes were needed. Yep, we just touched on this. Fans were pretty much done with every wrestler also having an outside job for some reason, because don't forget every single character was a plumber or a dentist or a clown. Why can't wrestling just be our form of employment? It was also in February 1997 where Raw went 2 hours, and I think that told management they needed better stories and more in-depth personas, which basically meant we needed a whole new template. That continued on the 10th of March where we changed the name of the show and the set, and from here on, man, it was like watching a totally different promotion. Of course, this was a response to what WCW Nitro was doing, but we know the deal there. Oftentimes, the WWF needs a kick up the ass before realizing it has fallen behind the times, and this was exactly that. A reminder that they could do more. The fact that narratives started to change as well was just the perfect relationship. In many ways, the company has never looked back. Number 9, the landmark first. There was also more going on around this too, because on February 17th, the WWF did something it had never done before. It crowned a new world champion on Raw. This was Psycho Sid, who defeated Bret Hart on the show, and I tell you, fans were stunned. We all assumed the Hitman was headed to WrestleMania with the gold, but no. Even more crazy was the fact that Bret had only just won the title at In Your House the Final Four, which also was a result of Shawn Michaels losing his smile and giving up the belt. So all of this was mad. If you like stats, it took 5 years before the company made such a switch on Monday nights, whereas WCW had no issue with such things. It took them only 2 months after the birth of Nitro to do this. Randy Savage defeated Ric Flair back in 1996, so again, the World Wrestling Federation was watching. Number 8, there's some really bad production. So this is somewhat unfair as we have made leaps and bounds when it comes to technology, but I have a feeling this may have been the case back in 97 too. For example, the 3rd of February episode of Raw from the Toronto Sky Dome looked so bad, I thought I'd lost my eyes. There's so much grain, I felt like I was eating oatmeal, and when you jump forward a month to a show from Germany, my gosh, it's like it was recorded on a flip phone. And yes, if you were told about the flip phone in 1997, your jaw would have hit the floor. But given a lot of people have claimed that WWF has always been at the forefront of production, I think that may actually have only been true from the late 90s onwards. Just compare these to what the company was putting out towards the end of the year. It's night and day, which leads me to believe a lot more money was injected into this side of the business. Again, it was time to compete. Number 7, the weird ECW invasion. I loved this at the time, and it was how I learned about ECW, so let's never change this. We also know why this went so nuts as well. Good old wrestling politics. For you see, the WWF felt like Sabu and RVD losing to Billy Gunn and the Road Dogg was fine, and yeah, sure, it would have been a year later, but this was when the New Age Outlaws had only just been put together, and let's be honest, there weren't much of anything. So as Rob and the Homicidal Maniac were at the top of ECW, this made no sense. They spoke as much, and they were right. As one Bruce Pritchard told Dave Meltzer though, you really think our guys would lose to theirs? Yes, otherwise an invasion angle is totally pointless. It's also strange Vince McMahon agreed to this in the first place because he was so anti-interpromotional warfare. Given WCW was kicking his ass though, he felt like he needed something. Sadly, this ended before it really started due to the above, but hey, it would kick off the relationship between WWE and Paul Heyman, which is still going strong today. Number 6, you need to see this rematch from WrestleMania 13, no less. It is a big one too, because on April 21st, Steve Austin and Bret Hart did lock horns again on Raw, and it's a street fight. This thing rules. Even today's over-the-top scraps could learn from this, because as usual, both guys wanted this to look as real as possible, and man, they tear into each other. It's vicious. Austin also refuses to release Bret's sharpshooter, plus later on we have ambulances getting involved. More people need to get their eyes on this, especially if you want an idea about the total feud between Steve Austin and Bret Hart. The whole thing is absolutely electric. Number 5, the crazy Intercontinental title program. WWF was actually quite smart with Steve Austin because they waited. There was no rush, he was going to be a success either way. Still, when you do tune into 1997, it is crazy to see the Rattlesnake as the Intercontinental Champion, and who is he feuding with? The Rock. think where they were going to be in a couple of years. As the Great One was becoming a superstar too, this was just awesome. And don't forget who was holding all of the top spots: Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, The Undertaker, Psycho Sid. The WWF was rammed with talent, but the guys just underneath were about to turn the industry on its head. You'll also see the famous angle where we do throw the IC belt into the sea, and when Steve just goes, "You know what, Dwayne, you can have this championship because I've got bigger fish to fry." And of course, he was talking about the World Wrestling Federation title. Number 4, the 22nd of September episode. So unlike today, Raw is a swift 2 hours in 1997, and on this date, to try and win the ratings war, the promotion booked one of the best 30 minutes in history. The date probably rings a bell, as it was the night Stone Cold finally dropped Vince McMahon with a stunner, but do you know what came next? That Falls Count Anywhere match between Triple H and Cactus Jack. You will have seen clips of this too, as it's when Cactus pile drives the game through a table on the entranceway, and it was back-to-back segments like this which turned the tide. WWF was playing the long game, knowing eventually fans would be back. And what do you know? With the statistics we have now, and the fact that WCW is dead, they weren't wrong. Number 3, the pre-DX New Age Outlaws. We've already talked about this, because yeah, they're really not that good. Now this wasn't their fault, because they honestly were just thrown together from nowhere. I mean, Billy Gunn was rockabilly before this. WWF didn't have a clue. They did have a few with the Legion of Doom, but the crutch of that was that Hawk and Animal were old, so it wasn't exactly deep. And honestly, you need to get to 1998 and the new DX when it clicked. That was their moment. I suppose this does make sense, because before all of this, they were just there. Their reason to be was D-Generation X, but you will be stunned if you haven't seen this early version. They are basically nothing. I don't want to be that guy, but I don't think they would have been that long for the company if it wasn't for the group in green. Number 2, the fabulous adventures of Rick Rude. History tells us that Rick Rude was so appalled about the Montreal screw job, he quit the WWF and was in WCW almost instantly. Now I do think there is some truth to this, but there's more to the story as well. Because 24 hours after the Montreal incident, Rick was on Raw, and he was saying how great Shawn Michaels was. Now the turnaround of these is obviously quick, so maybe Rude was just letting the thoughts roll about his brain, but I did not remember this, but it is correct. There he is. You do have to figure it was at least some of the reason, as he was doing alright in the WWF before he did become just another guy to jump the ship. Look, this happened a lot, and it was always fun, which is why you shouldn't get mad about it today. Number 1, HBK's dig that actually backfired. This actually happened on the 10th of November Raw we were just talking about, when Shawn Michaels was essentially going off the deep end. I mean, we were only hours removed from one of the most controversial moments in wrestling history. HBK also called Bret a dinosaur because he had gone to WCW, and that he would never dare beat up a 52-year-old man. Of course, this was a reference to the fact that Hart had famously punched Vince McMahon in the aftermath. The thing is, though, when you fast forward to WrestleMania 24, what was Shawn doing? Beating up a 60-year-old man as he took part in Ric Flair's first retirement match. I'm just saying. To be fair, Bret then topped in because he whooped a 64-year-old Vince at Mania 26, but it just goes to show. Watch what you say, because you never know what the future holds. I have genuinely good memories of the WWF in 1998. That was the year Steve Austin became the World Heavyweight Champion, don't forget. Stone Cold Steve Austin may not like that match, but man, it was everything when I was a fetus. You could also feel the World Wrestling Federation on the cusp of something big when bam, they did take off, and for a good while they never looked back. So what do we learn by binge watching Raw from that year? Well, I am Simon Miller the Nerd, and I have done this so you don't have to. Number 10, nobody can see, because of the signs. I mean, it really is an amazing sight. Even though in the modern day we're definitely on the increase, nothing compares to this. I did some research, and surely that's what Sinead O'Connor was singing about. It's when you fans see this sea of cardboard and wonder, well, how could anybody actually watch the wrestling? Well, the answer is it was pretty hard, and you can find the odd report from this era. A lot of individuals kept yelling, "Put down the sign!" They were told no. What's mad is that by the summer of 1998, it got even worse, or better, depending on how you look at it. There's just so many of them. And yes, a lot are offensive. It really does add to the excitement and energy, even if it's just the audience wanting to get on camera, because they are jumping and going nuts. It's quite the experience. I think even if it did take off again today, it would have to be managed a bit better. Ticket prices are too much, and I get it. You'd be well within your rights to be furious when all you watched is a piece of paper. Number 9, the matches are weird, because this ain't what we do in 2025. Raw was most definitely a television show to push forward stories mostly, so often the wrestling part played second fiddle. Say hello to Vince Russo, ladies and gentlemen. When you go through all 52 episodes, you'll be hard-pressed to remember any of them because they're just so fast. There's so many ridiculous finishes, there's so many run-ins. It's like watching wrestling and being spiked constantly with adrenaline. It always feels like WWE is just trying to navigate to the next promo skit. That does not mean it's not fun and it is of its time, but if you do want to be a geek and compare and contrast, yes, today's version has been balanced way better. There were even times when I eye-rolled watching this. I don't need another no contest, mostly because I just seen 688 no contests, number 8 apart from the March 23rd Raw. Now yes, this was the week of WrestleMania 14, so think of that, and even though Steve Austin was the number 1 contender for the world title, he had a match with The Rock. Talk about looking into the future. It only goes 10 minutes, but man, hold the phone. Instantly you can see this is the feud, and of course they had their Intercontinental title clashes the year prior. The WWF knew what they were doing. Here's a tease. Rocky is just selling everything too, which makes Austin look like a warrior, but you get it the other way around too. Just so well pitched for where we were and what we were trying to do. The real new generation. It is worth a watch from a novelty standpoint if nothing else, because it is 2 of the all-time greats clashing in a match that nobody remembers. It was also before Stone Cold would truly ascend to the heights that may never have been seen again. It is really cool. Number 7, Eric Bischoff was right. About Mike Tyson. Because yeah, before the WWF started chatting to Iron Mike, the rumor had always been that WCW had given him a call first. Either way, it doesn't actually matter. Mostly Eric had talked about the fact that when he sat down to check out his competition on the 19th of January 1998, he got worried. The Steve Austin Tyson segment was so good he knew WCW was f***ed. Excuse my language, but he was right. At the time, World Championship Wrestling couldn't get away with such TV as they'd been told to calm it down. But Vince McMahon had no such restrictions. He pushed the boat out. It got mainstream attention too, and let's not pretend otherwise. So many people saw this and fell in love with the Rattlesnake instantly. He was just such a badass, and he was taking on his boss. That was the late 90s American dream. Of course, Mike was involved all the way through to WrestleMania, which helped much in the same way Mr. T had for WrestleMania 1. This was an inspired touch. Number 6, the Hardcore title. There's another reason all of that worked too, however. What was happening beneath the main event scene, and the wonderful work of Mick Foley. As the new version of Mankind, he was trying to help out Vince McMahon. He was just so entertaining. Basically thought Vince was his new dad, and McMahon did get that back to him. He granted Foley with a brand new Hardcore title. Now within 28 days, this was thrown onto the Road Dogg, and yes, we did get the 24/7 rule, and it became a cornerstone of the Attitude Era. People loved it, as did I. The idea was so much fun. It's just wild it started with Mick, but didn't last more than a month. Feels like before sending it off into Crazy Land, we could have done a little bit more here. Foley was so good at making you care, even for this broken, falling apart piece of tin. The man was a master. It all still worked out, but this does tie in the speed in which we burn through things. It's almost as if there's no trust in the audience at all. Number 5, DX 2.0 was better, or at least less unhinged. I mean, they still broke the world constantly with exploits such as driving to a WCW show. But when you watch the Triple H, China, Shawn Michaels and Rick Rude version, that always feels like we're close to pushing the envelope way too far. It was a risky time. Obviously, they were iconic in their own way, but maybe the 2.0 version was just more fun. Still chopped their crotches a lot and shouted "suck it," but it felt like everybody benefited from this. Triple H went on to be a main eventer, the New Age Outlaws were a tag team staple, and X-Pac was the measuring stick for good wrestling. You'll forget about that one. China too really exploded during this period, so I suppose it felt more like a group that had a very specific aim, and the OG version was just chaos on wheels. Now you can't have version 2 without version 1. It's still how I felt. Number 4, Stone Cold should not have lost that title. I mean, there was a reason for it. Kane beat Steve Austin at the 98 King of the Ring First Blood match so fans would freak out and tune into Raw. Stone Cold would then win the championship back 24 hours later, and ratings would be through the roof. Screw you, WCW. That's exactly what happened. It is, however, still ridiculous. Kane is fortunate he was such a monster because other wrestlers wouldn't have been so lucky. He basically just shrugged this off, and really Austin could have held the title for the entire year and it would have been fine. People love this guy. Counterpoint to that is the same logic though. The rattlesnake was bulletproof, so even if he had lost to a llama, nobody would have cared. We just wanted to see him kick somebody's ass. dare I say it, but he may have been bigger than the WWF title. It was mostly down because the Big Red Machine was awesome in mid-98, so he needed a spotlight like this, but it was never going to take over Austin. So I do get it. Maybe there was just another way to pull it off. Number 3, Kane in general. Do not forget that when Glenn Jacobs was asked to put on a mask and be The Undertaker's brother, this was only meant to be a short run. He'd feud with the dead man through to WrestleMania 14, and that would be that. Thankfully, he did get mega over, and management kept him around. It did mean we didn't have a longer-term plan, and don't forget, despite trying to kill Taker at Bad Blood 1997, by January, he was helping him fight off Degeneration X. It was a ruse, of course, and he turned on his sibling again, but it felt like his motivations were all over the place. It was later on in 98 when I think the powers that be realized booking Kane was hard, because in October, The Undertaker turned on him and rejoined Paul Bearer, even though Bearer had also tried to murder The Undertaker earlier in the year. I mean, he'd also lied about his own damn family. And yes, all of this is super fun, but let's not pretend otherwise. It's 2 + 2 = potato, and it absolutely makes no sense. That's why I give them even more credit, though, I suppose. They still do make it very, very entertaining. Number 2, the gun. So this was crazy risky. We don't talk about it enough, and if you watch my Ups and Downs series, my gosh, this would have destroyed the crime counter. But on the 19th of October, Raw, Stone Cold Steve Austin was so done with Vincent Kennedy McMahon, he kidnapped him at gunpoint. That's right. I suppose in its own way it was a callback to the super controversial angle between Austin and Brian Pillman, but the WWF almost got kicked off air for doing that. The USA Network were furious. That was 1996 though, and 2 years on the landscape was so different. Apparently it was good to go again, but still. Stone Cold basically said he was going to kill Vince to the point McMahon pissed his pants. Yep. Of course, the punchline was it was a toy gun, and when Steve pulled the trigger, a banner popped out the barrel that read Bang 316. It means when you watch it after the fact, it is fine because you know it's a joke, but let's not forget a bunch of kids were seeing this and had no idea. Imagine your mum and dad walked in. This really does get quite dark. There was no fallout, to be fair, and this image you can see on the screen now became iconic. Fans even had it as a poster on their bedroom. That's why wrestling will never make any sense. Number 1, Austin versus McMahon should have been done at SummerSlam. So as a nerd, I can tell you, people were talking about this back then too. When you do your research, all the behind-the-scene newsletters were hinting that Steve Austin versus Vince McMahon was going to be the SummerSlam 1998 main event. It was not. It was all off the back of their first match on the 13th of April Raw, where of course Mick Foley became Dude Love and screwed it all up. Super smart, all things considered. Austin needed to rewrite the WWF main event style, and as he wanted to brawl all over the place, Foley was the perfect opponent. The summer pay-per-view was also booked for Madison Square Garden, which felt perfect when we pivot to Stone Cold versus The Undertaker instead. It is important to underline the WWF did a good job in making the dead man feel like a threat, but still, when you watch it week to week, it does come out of nowhere. I mean, Austin versus Taker was babyface versus babyface. Fans didn't really want to see that. Even more bizarrely, the company would hold off to February 1999 before they had their first proper fight, and maybe that ties in. I'm sure there was a worry that as soon as Steve had wrecked McMahon in an official match, the feud would come to a natural end, but there would have been ways and means. Either way, it had the momentum to be the top of SummerSlam. It just never happens.
The WWF was a loud, proud, swaggering, money-making beast in 1999. Being honest though, Monday Night Raw didn't exactly have a lot to offer in terms of actual matches that year. Put simply, for everything the company did absolutely right in 99, there was something else they really didn't. And that's just one of the things we learned after choosing to binge watch this year in the era of Attitude. Want a few more? Well, I'm Gareth, this is WhatCulture Wrestling, and here are 10 things you learn binge watching every WWE Raw from 1999. Number 10, WrestleMania 15 was the real end of an era. Post WrestleMania 15, everything started to change. The fabled Austin vs. McMahon story did rage on throughout much of 1999, but it wasn't the only focus in WWF minds. It becomes clear with each passing episode of Raw that Triple H was beginning to take center stage as the future. Also, the company was starting to run out of ideas. They'd done the beer bath, the fake gun angle, the constant stunners, and even a cage match between Vince and Stone Cold in February. Come the traditional post-Mania lull, they were fresh out of new material that had helped the bread-winning feud soar to new heights. That's presumably why the feud took a dip in quality and started to desperately clutch at straws to remain relevant. It starts to become apparent by summer that Austin vs. McMahon needed to encroach on other hot angles to stay near the top of the booking sheets. Oh, and speaking of which, number 9, the higher power sucked.
It was me, Austin. It was me all along, Austin.
Those iconic words live long in the memories of wrestling fans worldwide. But the weird revisionist high-fiving for Vince McMahon's greater/higher power reveal masks something few really want to admit. It absolutely sucked. No word of a lie, this blew big stinking chunks. Fans in attendance treated McMahon's nonsensical 7th of June swerve as a colossal wet fart. He went from playing the borderline sympathetic victim of The Undertaker's satanic magic to pulling the damn strings. And people were not ready for that. It was the kind of gotcha moment Vince Russo was hammered for booking in WCW later that year. Russo was still in the WWF then, so he must have had something to do with how this reveal played out. Looking back, somebody probably should have popped a hand up and asked if McMahon was the right fit. Yes, he was a major character, but his announcement just did not work. Number 8, they had no idea how to book Big Show. WWE has sort of admitted that Big Show struggled during his first 12 months in the Fed over the years. Paul White's weight gain and lack of motivation are often pointed out with an accusing finger, but that was only ever half the battle. His booking was also quite questionable. After debuting at Feb's St. Valentine's Day Massacre pay-per-view, Show wandered around without a ring name for a while. His mini-feud heading into WrestleMania 15 with Mankind went nowhere, and so did his part in the dreadful union with Foley, Ken Shamrock, and Test come spring. Make no mistake, Show's first year was a shambles. He didn't live up to his potential or billing, formed a weird tag team with The Undertaker called the Unholy Alliance, and then ended 1999 with one of the worst WWF title reigns of the era. Great start. Things would get a bit better for old Show over the years though, so I want to know what your favourite Big Show moment of all time is. Probably not one from 99, but you let me know what is in the comment section below. Number 7, Chris Jericho's debut could have been better. Raw is Jericho, baby! It has always amazed this guy right here when fans point to Chris Jericho's WWF debut as one of the most amazing things in wrestling history. Sure, he became big news, but the ex-WCW mid-carder visibly toiled when trying to match The Rock on the mic. Plus, his boo-boo facial expressions made Y2J look like a scolded poodle. Jericho himself was upfront and honest about the problems with his company bow in print. He expressed regret for those facials in his first and second book, and said he definitely could have done more to appear like the WWF's next big thing. Of course, he did become a smash hit in the end, but those first few appearances weren't exactly all that promising. His 9th of August debut remains a curious piece of company lore, and yet it could have been so much better. Honestly, just go back and watch it. You'll get goosebumps when the video counts down, and enjoy that wonderful crowd pop that follows. But you'll probably cringe your way through everything else. Number 6, This Is Your Life will never be topped. The This Is Your Life banter between Mankind and The Rock was so damn endearing that WWE tried to repeat the trick several times over the next 20 years. They even wheeled Mick Foley out to trade some jokes with John Cena in 2011, and had Alexa Bliss do some memory lane strolling for Bayley in 2017. Neither of these sequels could match the original though. It is fascinating to watch this 27th of September 99 segment back 25 years on. 25! Oh, do you feel sick yet? If only because the improvised laugh shared by Foley and Rock threatened to derail the entire thing. Arguably, it is a little too long, sure, but This Is Your Life is still some ride in 2024. It's even funnier to know that Vince McMahon was tearing his finely coiffed hair out behind the scenes and frantically rewriting Raw's format when these guys ran over their allotted time by a mile. Totally worth it though. Thanks for stopping by to watch this 99 Raw experience today. Now go and tap on that subscribe button down below for more of this WhatCulture wrestling stuff in your day. Number 5, the Vegas wedding is super awkward. Now, you're not going to see a ton of complaints about how things haven't aged well here. That's pretty obvious, right? The world was a much different place in 1999, and the WWF were happy to push the envelope by producing weekly shocks that relied on sex, bad language, blood, and more soap opera tropes than you could shake a stick at. Even so, that Vegas wedding between Triple H and Stephanie McMahon was, eek. Things might not be so bad had trips darted off to pastures new a few years later, or if Steph was some short-lived diva and wasn't Vince McMahon's own daughter. That didn't happen though, and she is. So this drug-induced informal drive-through ceremony is super awkward to relive today. It's not like WWE can readily acknowledge how the power couple began, is it? Triple H drugged Stephanie, married her under Daddy Dearest's nose, and Test, who was largely forgotten about shortly thereafter, and was treated like the babyface for doing it. Remember the 29th of November, it seems. Number 4, there were 4 WWF title changes on Raw. The WWF title changed hands a grand total of 3 times on Raw between 1993 and 1998. Then the swift booking style practiced since 1997 hastened further into 99. That year, the same belt switched holder another 4 times in 12 months on the flagship program. Raw is pay-per-view? Apparently. Mankind was first up by bagging the belt on the 4th of January episode, which was actually taped on the 29th of December, but still counts due to the air date. The Rock was next up and beat Foley in a ladder match on the 15th of February episode. Then Steve Austin toppled The Undertaker on the 28th of June, and finally Triple H earned a run by beating Mankind on the 23rd of August. Oh, and the top prize was also vacated on the 20th of September following Vince McMahon's brief stint. His random title win meant that the WWF booked no less than 5 title switches on free TV alone in 1999. They'd slow that roll by penning only 3 more title changes over the next 3 to 4 years. But they had to, really. The belt was becoming a hot potato. Number 3, Vince McMahon's title reign should not have happened. Now this was rubbish. WCW detractors often giggle at Vince Russo booking himself as world champion in 2000, and rightly so. However, staunch WWE loyalists also ignore the fact that Vince McMahon actually played that card before Russo had the chance. It wasn't as offensively terrible, sure, but it wasn't exactly great either. McMahon won the WWF title from Triple H on the 16th of September 99 episode of Smackdown. Come Raw the following Monday, though, Vince decided to vacate the belt so others could scrap for it in a 6-pack challenge at Unforgiven. Why? Well, who knows? The whole thing was ridiculously pointless. A Mr. McMahon title reign might have worked had it been longer or a little earlier. After all, the disgraced former boss did work matches when the occasion called for it, and he was once one of the top heel characters in late 90s wrestling. This short spell as a champ, though, it was definitely a mistake in retrospect. Number 2, The Undertaker needed a rest. Behold the face of a man who could do with a rest. By 1999, The Undertaker was noticeably going through burnout. He'd been a near constant on WWF telly since debuting in 1990, aside from a little sabbatical in 94, and had worked through several injuries to help maintain the roster's star power. All that had taken a toll on the guy, and it showed. You could probably count the number of legitimately good matches Taker had in 1999 on one hand, and his tweaked satanic gimmick had also gone as far as it could. The company burned through a lot of material with the Ministry of Darkness, Corporate Ministry, his tag team with Big Show, and more. It was time for a break, despite starring in several memorable moments of the era, including that weird symbol business, his wacky abduction of Stephanie, and a few WWF title bouts. Taker's year was a poor one. He just looked knackered, really, and like he'd rather be anywhere else than on Raw by summer. Number 1, Smackdown instantly diluted Raw's appeal. Smackdown debuted as a pilot in April 1999, before becoming a full-blown accompaniment to Raw starting with the 26th of August episode. It was great for fans. More content in an era when people could not get enough. Yay! But the company had to stretch angles out across multiple shows rather than saving everything for Mondays, and that posed problems. Vince Russo, who was still the head writer, experienced some Taker-ish burnout of his own around this time, and he was infamously horrified when McMahon told him to hire a nanny to take care of his kids. His apathy towards the new Thursday night show was evident on screen too. From late August onwards, Raw took a bit of a nosedive in sustained quality before Russo left for WCW. It is obvious when watching each episode back-to-back today. 99 marked the first time Raw's stronghold on weekly WWF output had been threatened, and nobody really seemed quite sure how to make it work. 25 years on, though, the red brand is still somehow going strong.
Be it the debut of Smackdown or Arnold Schwarzenegger turning up, the WWE was firing off in 1999. And I tell you, it was a wild time. If you want to call the Blue Brand the most successful additional wrestling show ever, I think you're well within your rights to say so. But hey, let's go back to 1999 and see what we can learn by binge-watching the whole thing. Number 10, there are some weird matches. Alright, so we got all excited during that intro, but let's be honest, the WWF was definitely finding their feet with Smackdown at first because, man, there were some strange fights. Large reason for this was due to the fact it was the Attitude Era, and yeah, the in-ring portion of proceedings often came second to the madness outside. It's why during this period we got the likes of Triple H versus Gillberg and Shane McMahon versus Joey Abs. If you jump forward to the 16th of September edition, my gosh, you get the Big Boss Man and Al Snow in a pepper on a pole match, and you heard me right, and no, this was not good. Shock horror. And in case you don't know, Pepper was a dead dog. Even ones on paper like X-Pac versus Chris Jericho and Kane facing the game for the WWE title take a while to get going. 'Tis the season, I suppose, but do not go out of your way. It's probably not worth it. Number 9, another tuxedo match. I mean, we could probably leave it there, right? What are we doing? It is to the 2nd of September Smackdown where Howard Finkel stormed out and challenged a totally confused Tony Chimmel to this stipulation contest. And I'm sat here in 2024, and I'm still not entirely sure what's happening. It was all from the mind of Vince Russo as we saw Chris Jericho grinning from ear to ear backstage. Because yes, this was when he had hired the Fink as his personal ring announcer. His emotion changed to terror here and there because for some reason, this does indeed go 10 minutes. But as suggested, we had already done this once before back in 1995. There, Harvey Whippleman was our opponent and we should have learned our lesson. So let's do it now here, please. Never ever do this again. It wasn't very good. Number 8, people did not like Michael Cole. And I actually understand this. I've been there. Because when I first joined WhatCulture, everybody hated me. That's right. Who the flub is this guy? Then they looked me up and my word, he's a bald a-hole. It was the same in 1999 due to the fact that everybody loved Jim Ross, so when his heir apparent rolled around, we were scared and therefore took our rage out on Cole. Happens all the time. It's why Smackdown was a good idea as it gave new guys a proper shot, although Michael had been in the company for years by this point. It was just time for his big break. The thing is, if you do go and watch him now without this bias, he's good. Cole gets better with time, of course, but to do what the WWF expected commentators to do, bam, you can see why they liked him. He also tries damn hard, which counts for a lot, which he's also done over the last 3 decades. So I think we all owe Michael Cole a nice apology. Number 7, The Rock gets a bunch of wins. Makes sense. It's his show. Sort of. Look at this though. On the 23rd of August, Raw, Triple H won the WWF title, and 3 days later as SmackDown kicked off, he was indeed facing The Rock. Shawn Michaels was brought in as a special guest referee too, and my word. About 5 times during this, you see the Great One clearly have the new champion beaten when shenanigans screwed him over. I mean, without Shane McMahon, he definitely would have done it. This carried on as well when the Great One was about to hit the people's elbow when wham, HBK took him out with the sweet chin music to realign with his old friend and stop Rocky from holding the belt. Everybody, including the commentators, made this clear as well, so yeah, we were protecting the most electrifying man as best as we could. This did make sense. It was not 2 + 2 = potato, because by the end of the year, he was gonna be a megastar. 7, Vince Russo's WCW template likely started here. That's right. It was in October 1999 when Vince Russo jumped to WCW, and he's always claimed a huge reason for that was SmackDown. Vince McMahon expected him to now work 2 shows for the same money. It's likely going to annoy anyone. I would guess Russo had this in his head too, as the first Blue Brand episodes feel a lot like what he would do over at World Championship Wrestling, aka they are bonkers. Storytelling dominated the wrestling as we had what felt like dozens of segments with a lot of bodies. There were just so many gimmicks. I mean, on the 23rd of September episode, we had a chokeslam match, as well as an Inferno one, Boiler Room Brawl, a Brahma Bull rope fight, and a First Blood. I don't know about you, but this feels like too much. If you have lost track, that is 6 stipulation matches in 2 hours. And now go and watch WCW when he was in control and get back to me. Exactly. Number 5, it is pretty good. Yep, I want to make that clear, I really enjoyed it. This is mostly because the fans are so into the action, but you can also tell the WWF has confidence too. Whatever they were going to do, they were going to do it hard. Even when it does go off the rails, it works for one specific reason. The talent on the books were just excellent. Steve Austin, The Rock, Mankind, The Undertaker, Chris Jericho, China, Kane, all these people were treated like they were super duper stars. Mostly because they were. It does mean that when things go totally crazy, they can all figure this out, and that combo somehow makes these shows zoom by. It is the fastest 2 hours of TV you could hope for, and you leave actually wanting to see what next week will bring. That is how it's meant to work too. Even in 2024, the WWF were just on it. Number 4, not all the buildings are full. Right. Straight off, I don't care. If a promotion sells out a venue, awesome. That is the best. If they don't, whatever. We are running 52 weeks a year. That is pretty hard. But your eye does catch certain things when watching these shows, and yep, despite being knee-deep in the Attitude Era, you can see that a couple of buildings aren't always packed to the rafters. Now, this could be due to the fact SmackDown was a new show, so fans wanted to see what the deal was, and one episode was in Vegas. WWE does have a history of weird houses there. It is most definitely the minority, however, and not the majority, but hey, you all love talking about it, so there you go. Stick it up your pipe. I don't know why I said that. Number 3, the sexual chocolate embarrassment. Never watch this with someone who doesn't get wrestling. In fact, don't watch it at all. No wonder Mark Henry took so long to work. This is awful. Early on in Smackdown's run, we really did lean into this though, as Henry admitted he was a sex addict and pretty much said this started with his sister when he was younger. And no, I am not kidding. Mark was in therapy during all of this, so in a state of shock, the therapist asked when the last time this happened was, and Henry replied, "Just the other day," and I shouted, "F off," and I mean it, it's garbage. This is full-on bottom-of-the-barrel nonsense and you should stay well away. It's horrible stuff and I don't know who the audience is. I never want to see this again, and I can't believe I had to watch it twice. My gosh. Number 2, Schwarzenegger had a great time. We mentioned this in the intro because, yeah, Arnold Schwarzenegger appears on the 11th of November Smackdown as a promotional tactic for his movie End of Days, and he has a really good time. That's nice. It helped the WWF too because it told you the show was going to be legit and not throwaway. But man, this is a little weird. Not only does he ham it up with Vince McMahon, but he gets given his own title belt, and then during the main event as he does commentary, he knocks out Triple H. This must have been super cool for the real-life Paul Levesque, who was a huge Arnie fan growing up, plus you also see him backstage interacting with The Rock. Maybe he knew. It is the right use of a celebrity guest though, and it is Schwarzenegger. He is and was a pretty big deal. Number 1, they definitely muted some Jericho chants. We all know that when Chris Jericho first jumped to the WWF from the WCW, it didn't go to plan. It started well, then he ran afoul of the top guys and Vince McMahon. He had to start again. Chris was a heel in a feud with Ken Shamrock, but the audience didn't care. They loved them some Y2J. This is why the fans do indeed start to chant for Chris Jericho, but the production truck must have got ordered to stop these. Cause yeah, you hear them vanish, and doesn't that just sum it up? Yes. Yes, it does. It would actually be a few more years before Jericho hit the top level, but once again, if you do go back to the late 90s and early 2000s, could we have pulled the trigger a little bit earlier? You bet your ass. But better late than never, but better never late. The year 2000 was one of the most successful in WWF history. We were knee-deep in the Attitude Era as wrestling was cool again, and as for the World Wrestling Federation, they were flying after finally putting the sword to WCW. Didn't really have to worry about them anymore. That didn't stop the runaway freight train it had become. There's 10 things you learn binge watching Raw from 2000. Number 10, the war takes a turn. So we just talked about this and it is true. 2000 saw a huge change in fortunes given where we had been 2 years prior. Nitro was such a mess the WWE was able to try new things knowing they were going to win the ratings war. And while some attempts were awful, plenty more did stick. And the fans loved it. The WWF also threw their weight behind soap opera stories, which brought us to everything between Triple H, Kurt Angle, and Stephanie McMahon. That meant we now had a damn love triangle. I do point this out just because you can see with this story that we were starting to be far more patient with things, and do not forget, the only reason this narrative did stop is because Hunter didn't like the idea that Kurt Angle would steal his girl. His ego was hurt. It did make for great TV though, and the company, as we know, was never gonna look back. Number 9, the Radicals weren't given a chance. A huge story in 2000 was the news that Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn, and Eddie Guerrero had negotiated their release from WCW and were headed to the WWF. This was massive. While they had never reached their potential in World Championship Wrestling, most people knew they deserved more, so surely that was about to happen now. And the answer is sort of. Each guy would take their own path. During their very first match they had under Vince McMahon, they lost. Yep, couldn't let this idea go that they were WCW guys. Then got worse as Eddie got injured, and honestly, go see where these 4 were after a few weeks. We didn't keep this momentum going at all. If we focus on Saturn and Malenko too, they never really overcame this either. I mean, Dean soon became James Bond, and Perry fell in love with a mop. There's stories behind both of these, but still. I'm sure you've seen how some fans react today when so-called WWE guys go to AEW. Well, this was 10 times more crazy than all of that. Number 8, the 24/7 title concept can work. Yep, the 24/7 title was awful. If it weren't for R-Truth, who knows how bad it would have gotten, but WWE did have a reason for trying to bring it back. It had worked very well before. In 2000, Crash Holly had made this his entire gimmick, and it was great. He would always find a way to scurry away with his championship, and we actually thought about the creative bits. Go watch the spot where Gerald Briscoe is asleep. It is genuinely funny. You also get Pat Patterson and a bunch of other guys going out of their way to have fun with this. Why we didn't use it as our example, I do not know. The modern version felt like an afterthought. Truth definitely borrowed from the way Crash cared about his title, but he really was given nothing else to work with. Hence why today, as I am talking to you, that belt doesn't exist anymore. Number 7, secret tag team depth. So we know that Vince McMahon was never much of a tag team guy and often pushed two people together to break them up. That's what he did. In 2000, though, by choice or by accident, we actually had a bunch of good teams. We all remember the Hardys, Dudleys, and Edge and Christian tearing it up, but there was also the APA, Too Cool, Kai and Tide, TNA, Right to Censor, and a load more. I'm not saying all of these were capable of having barn burners, but the overall level was alright. New Age Outlaws were around for a while too before Road Dogg and X-Pac joined forces, when the Roadie decided to move on to K-Quick. So yeah, sure, that was a bit weird. The point is, you may not be able to name as many teams in other years where WWE seemed to be doing okay. I mean, take 2021. Everybody then was saying, man, this scene needs more bodies. Well, you can go back to the year 2000. Number 6, the bizarre post-Mania Raw. So this was the year when at WrestleMania we had a McMahon in every corner. Stephanie and Shane were also doing this because they wanted to put Daddy Vince out of business. And then we got to the following Monday, and yep, all of this was totally ignored. Well, no, it was worse than that because the chairman of the board hugged his family like nothing had happened. This also led to the birth of a new corporation. What the flub was going on? Swerve was Vince screwing over The Rock to align himself with Triple H, but the problem there was that we'd already seen it. McMahon and Austin had been doing this for ages. We really didn't need a round 2 with different competitors. It was just pushing things into a feud that didn't need it because I tell you, The Rock versus Triple H was enough. If you were around at the time though, you know the deal. We just had to talk about the McMahons as much as possible. 5, the senseless Rikishi turn. This was the era of let's do things because it's fun to do things. So yep, one day we took Rikishi, who was so over as the happy dancing guy, and turned him heel. Why? I'm not saying we shouldn't have moved him to the main event as Big Keish had gotten crazy over, but deciding he was the guy who ran over Stone Cold? I don't know, man. It also brought us to that infamous line of, I did it for The Rock. And yeah, this didn't work. Nobody wanted to boo him, and by the time we got to Triple H taking credits, the whole thing was messy. We did try a feud with Steve Austin, but once again the audience didn't want to jeer Rikishi, so he was set to fail in many ways. When it didn't click, we didn't try again in other guys. We just moved him back to exactly where he was. This was a silly, silly move. Number 4, Foley over Shawn. It feels mad this was in the year 2000, but at one point Shawn Michaels was the WWF commissioner. This was mostly as the company was still paying him, so wanted HBK involved, plus they were keen to move on from Sergeant Slaughter, who had this role prior. If I were to guess, I don't think Michaels was much into this as he basically disappeared towards the start of the year, when we did get a new appointment in June, Mick Foley. Difference was obvious as Foley embraced this with so much glee. He has often said since it was some of the most fun he's ever had in wrestling. Having a babyface authority figure was also a welcome change, and some of the skits Mick did with Edge, Christian, and Kurt Angle were just the best. Who knew fun could be fun? He added so much to the show that when eventually WWF decided to get rid of him, everybody was baffled. But once again, during this period, yeah, they did that a lot. Number 3, sticking with Jericho. If you've read any of Chris Jericho's books, you know the deal here. After quite the debut, he fell foul of WWF management and was basically made to start again. He went from a potential feud with The Rock to having to have a good match with X-Pac or lose his job. I would assume somebody backstage was still a fan because on the April 17th, 2000 Raw, we got that famous shock where from nowhere, Jericho beat Triple H for the world title after an Earl Hebner fast count. The pop is still amazing, but as we learned before the end of the show, this was only done to get more hate for the game. The decision was reversed due to dodgy refereeing as Chris flew back down the card. The reaction should have told those in charge that Jericho was clearly ready to go, however. Because this wasn't the plan, we moved on as fast as we could. Watching now, though, yeah, we easily could have gone all the way with this. It would have worked. Number 2, Triple H was awesome. Say what you want about one Paul Levesque. In the year 2000, he was one of the best wrestlers on the planet. His feud with The Rock was great, but he also had bangers with Jericho, Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, and even Taka Michinoku. Hunter just wanted to work. He would bump his ass off when needed to and looked incredible as he turned into an action figure. Plus, he was a right dick on the mic, which was perfect. He was a heel. Even if you can't stand the man, you'd be hard-pressed to argue against what he was doing in this 12-month period. He was just on fire, and the only thing that halted this was that quad tear. Before that, I tell ya, it's quite amazing. Number 1, the lack of Steve Austin. Having Stone Cold on Raw would have been better in 2000. He was the biggest star ever, you can't pretend he wouldn't have helped. With that said, the WWF was far more prepared for his absence through injury than many assumed, because for 12 months Raw was mostly pretty good TV. Episodes zipped along as we made sure to get new people over, and of course The Rock used this to become the ultimate star. We've mentioned Triple H already, and The Undertaker still had a great aura to him. The main event scene was solid. It could be why Austin didn't start smashing it until the 2001 Raw Rumble. He needed to fit back into the pack before doing what he always did, taking over.
Smackdown has had some weird moments throughout the years. There was a long period where it honestly existed just to show highlights from Raw. It's absolutely ridiculous. That wasn't the case in 2000 as the show was brand new and therefore a fun plaything. What's it like watching today? Well, sit down with me, Simon Miller, and let's find out. Number 10, Stephanie's title reign. If you were watching in the year 2000, you know the top angle was the McMahon-Helmsley era. They had control over the whole company, so like any promotion would do, we quickly went and made them both world champions. Easy peasy heat. What has been lost today, I suppose just due to time, is that Stephanie was really good in this role. She just existed to wind you up and be hated. After she had won the championship from Jacqueline in March, McMahon held it for 5 months before losing it to Lita, and yeah, it is just a really fun ride. Now sure, women's wrestling way back when sadly wasn't a big enough deal, but putting Steph at the forefront of it did at least mean we got some entertaining stories. It also allowed you to despise this pairing because they did run riot, so it has aged very well, all things considered. It's a good example of how sometimes, here it comes, we gotta let these things play out. Number 9, The Big Show, and how WWF did not know what to do with him. This was mad for 3 reasons, the first being Vince McMahon had claimed to everybody when Paul White was in WCW that he knew what they were doing wrong. Then he did jump ship, and it was kind of more of the same. The Big Show had also only debuted in 1999, so it's not like we've been doing this for a while. And lastly, look at the guy. We can't figure that out in wrestling? What is happening? In 2000, Simply seemed to be on the menu, so we made sure no matter what, Big Show was constantly bossed around by Stephanie and Triple H. I get the whole feeling pressured thing, but here we had a man that could have crushed Hunter if he wanted to. We just didn't do the best job in getting that fear across. The feud with Shane McMahon halfway through the year is great as you get some crazy bumps, but it's also there to hint that Show is stupid. Again, that's not the best idea. If we are being honest, the Giant in World Championship Wrestling had a much better start with this, and while there was a lot of extenuating circumstances, you forget that now. So when we do take a step back, it just wasn't the best idea. Number 8, the odd use of Taz. Overall, WWE didn't use Taz as they should have done. He had a great debut at the Royal Rumble, which I think spooked the locker room. Everybody apparently went out of their way to bury the guy. Once again, it was stupid. Over the years, the squash match with Triple H during the April edition of Smackdown has become part of this. But when you watch it today, well, it's nowhere near as bad as some people make out. It's not the longest of matches, but the game still sells his ass off for Taz when push comes to shove, and Michael Cole is going nuts about how tough the former ECW man is. The finish also sees Tommy Dreamer accidentally hit his friend, and Triple H smacked Taz right in the balls. It's not like it's just pedigree 1, 2, 3. We did try and protect the guy. Today, people say it really harmed Taz's credibility, but that was more what we did overall, I think. You watch this match as a fan of the Man in Orange, and I think you'd be quite excited. You were wrong, but still, I think it deserves another watch. Number 7, the DX Express. On the 27th of April, The Rock welcomed Stone Cold Steve Austin back days before the Great One faced Triple H at Backlash. Austin was going to be the guest enforcer during that match, and to get people mega excited, he returned on this evening and destroyed the DX Express, which was the group's bus. Talk about seeing the future of wrestling travel. What's crazy to watch now is that when Stone Cold drops this log of concrete onto the vehicle, barely anybody sells it at all. I don't know if this was a bad edit or what have you, but the McMahons look so nonplussed. Shane almost seems confused. I think Triple H spots this because he reacts like his entire life has been ruined, and good. This has to be the way, otherwise why do the bit? You gotta sell it to death. Of course, these days people are so mad about this. Triple H is well in with the corporation at this stage, so why is he still driving around in a D-Generation X bus? Well, all I've got for you is that in wrestling lore, Vince and Co. must have been part of this group. Pretend I didn't say that. People just gonna get angry again. Number 6, Chyna and Eddie needed each other. This is how powerful hindsight is. Back in 2000, some hardcore fans couldn't believe that Eddie Guerrero was teaming up with Chyna, but I tell ya, this was a work of art. The Ninth Wonder of the World definitely benefited because following her Intercontinental title feud with Chris Jericho, she didn't really have much to do. For many reasons, her on-screen relationship with Triple H was also done, and I suppose Eddie was the same. He needed a proper WWF feud to get him in the office's good books, so put your hands together. It also helped establish him to a new audience, but when you go through 2000s, it's so obvious to see. This is one of those pairings that flew just because they played off each other so well. There's also a horrible sadness watching it today as both passed away way too soon. Thankfully, though, we do have awesome stuff like this to keep the memory alive. Number 5, the crazy short matches. I mean, it was the Attitude Era, but even then, you forget how little match length mattered at the turn of the century. If you're only used to modern-day TV, this will blow your brain, especially as most go through commercial breaks. That was not happening in 2000. It's mostly because we were far more focused on storylines and the soap opera aspects, but still. On the 6th of January SmackDown, you get Kurt Angle versus The Rock, and it goes 4 minutes. 4! And it ends in a DQ, because of course it did. The longest fight on that broadcast is Triple H versus Rikishi, which goes a whopping 7 minutes. But this was the way, as were the non-finishes. The amount of run-ins and DQs is bonkers, and some matches just end. That's right, no actual announcement, there's just a huge melee and we're done. The final nonsense, though, must go to the ref bumps. My gosh, the ref bumps. There's so many before long, you're confused when the referee doesn't go down. So let's definitely not go back to this. It's too much, even for an idiot like me. Number 4, the apparent creative burnout. When SmackDown was born into this world in 1999, there were no new hires. The Raw team were just told to write 2 hours of extra TV, and it's long been touted as the reason Vince Russo left. It was way too much. You still had the same cast of characters, and as Vince McMahon's legendary work ethic didn't change, all of a sudden employees were pushed to breaking point. The thing is, you do not notice this as a fan, because the product was so hot at the time that in your head you're just like, more Rock, more Austin, more Triple H, more Undertaker, hell yeah. It feels like it was an extra reason to do the brand split come 2002, as well as the death of WCW, but I tell you, for a good while they kept the ideas coming, so more power to them. 2000 is just as entertaining, if not more so, than other times in the WWF. Mostly, everybody in front of the camera and behind the camera was just on fire. Number 3, the sheer star power. I mean, we just mentioned it. Nostalgia plays a role, of course, but still, it goes off the charts in December, as on one episode of SmackDown, you get The Rock versus The Undertaker versus Stone Cold versus Kurt Angle for the WWF title. That's right. This was due to the fact the Armageddon pay-per-view was round the corner, and as we were going to do a big 6-man Hell in a Cell there, why not just tease it all now? It sounds mad, but at the time, you wanted it. The truth is, star power matches like this were just par for the course here, because fans and announcers weren't going overly mad. This was the norm. This is what we expected. Can you imagine how an already struggling WCW felt about this too? We all know what was on the cards, but they must have already known because the tide had truly turned by this point, and World Championship Wrestling had nothing to fire back with. Let's not forget too that Angle managed to survive all of this and hold on to his championship into 2001. I loved it back then, and I love it now. Number 2, the bizarre start to the Radicals. This was huge. Perry Saturn, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, and Dean Malenko jumping to the WWF at the same time. Even when it was first teased, nobody could believe it. 4 up-and-coming talents, all deciding to move to pastures new. We did give them the big hoo-ha as Mick Foley was the guy who introduced them, which brings us to February. We've already established Triple H was in charge on the TV, so he did indeed promise these guys contracts if they could win 2 out of 3 matches tonight. Ruh-roh. Now you think we would have done the obvious, but we did not. Instead, the Radicals lost all of these as X-Pac defeated Dean, the New Age Outlaws beat Eddie and Perry, whereas Benoit couldn't get the job done against Hunter. What a bunch of losers. It was classic Vince McMahon in the sense the WCW guys had to prove they would accept not winning, but it did not help. Guerrero and Benoit eventually found their way, but Malenko and Saturn must have known. They were correct. Before long, one of them was in love with a mop and the other was James Bond. Everybody then started to tell them they couldn't cut it in the big leagues, and this was so ridiculous, we just made things overly difficult. Why we don't do the obvious things from time to time, I don't know. It's too easy, I suppose. Then they're gonna have real problems, so I don't care. Number 1, you can't help but watch. This is the biggest takeaway from all 52 episodes. Much like Super Hands, it is incredibly Moorish. It really does tie into what any good TV show needs to offer, because as soon as you've watched one episode of SmackDown, you move on instantly and even check Raw to fill in the gaps. Everything was just so damn compelling. The classic 2-hour format is just the best for wrestling too, and given these days you watch it without adverts, man, they just fly by. It's why you always want to keep going. It's basically drugs. The WWE were also super into cliffhangers back then, and while they would eventually get overdone, they still work here. So all in all, you can start to tell why everybody was so up on the product at the time. They had a format down. Before they did run it into the ground, well, it was pretty damn good. Is 2001 the best year in pro wrestling history? Maybe. I do get why people think that. For one, you get WrestleMania 17. On the other hand, it is the start of the invasion angle. It still makes me sad. To prove it one way or another to my brain, I decided to sit down and watch as much Raw as I could from this 12-month period. And what a loser I am for doing that. I also am Simon Miller, and here's what you will learn when you binge the shit out of it. Number 10, WCW is treated a little bit like a joke. I know, I am sorry, but I have to start here to get it out the way. From day one, WCW is basically laughed at. Now, it's not directly, but you can just feel Vince McMahon looking to undermine that promotion instantly. When you get to the blow-off matches, WWF killed these guys. And look, I love Lance Storm, and I mean I really love him, but it is a shame we kick all this off with him and Hugh Morris only because of our own expectations. Given we had wanted this for years, we were like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be Goldberg and Sting taking over, and we would not see them at all. There's also the fact that Booker T was ready to debut at the King of the Ring pay-per-view shortly after this, and I think we should have waited for him. He was a huge name and a former world champion, and that guy was going to attack Steve Austin. That's what we wanted. I actually don't mind it being somebody like Lance, but he went after Steve Blackman. I don't really understand why we didn't make this headline material. The speed of the thing is also crazy. A Storm is gone almost as soon as he does arrive. Dare I say it, it just feels rushed. You shouldn't rush a WCW invasion, because again, fans had literally been dreaming about this for years. It's so damn sad, because just to draw a line under it, I am a geek. Number 9, Buff Bagwell's infamous last match. So we all know the story here. Buff Bagwell versus Booker T was so bad as the first ever WCW match on Raw that all World Championship Wrestling plans were cancelled. And sure, it's not a 5-star classic, but after watching it again, I would actually describe it as a passable match you'd probably expect on TV. I mean, yeah, that's it. The problem was that for years, the WWF audience had been told that WCW sucked. So as soon as these wrestlers were in the ring, the fans rejected them. They weren't interested in this. We want to see our homegrown stars. It was on the 2nd of July 2001, and that date stands out because a week later, the WWF was headed to WCW territory. So why didn't we just wait? I have a feeling the Booker and Buff may have been thrown in the deep end. It does mean in terms of the overall presentation it's not good because you can see the crowd fighting the sea change. But if you were to be weird and turn the sound off and watch, meh, it's fine, and I think it's been grossly exaggerated ever since. Number 8, the hidden gems. Given this was the Attitude Era, WWE didn't really feel like they had to save mega matches for pay-per-view. The money was flowing in and the buildings were full. I assume they thought it was going to be like this forever. A huge upside is you do get these random fights on TV, such as Rob Van Dam versus The Rock. And sure, Rocky was by far the biggest star, but RVD was so over the moment he walked in the door. You could have saved this if you had wanted to, but nope, we just did it on the 24th of September Raw. A month later, we get something similar because Rhino and Kurt Angle lock horns, and yes, that was a pun, and it's also really good. We showed a WWF audience what the Man Beast was all about. Steve Austin versus Chris Benoit also happens on TV in May, plus Angle is teaming with William Regal in April. You have to track that down too. My gosh, they would have worked so well together. Due to the sheer madness, none of these get talked about today, but they really are worth your time. It's far more fun than the usual segments we talk about too, because it feels like they are brand new. It was a genuine treat. Number 7, the bizarre 2-man power trip. Do not forget, in early 2001, Triple and Steve Austin were trying to end each other. That is important. You then get the heel turn at WrestleMania by Stone Cold, which annoyed Hunter, who on the following Raw went to complain about this to Vince McMahon. McMahon reminded Triple H he lost to The Undertaker on the pay-per-view, so you better shut up. The game was annoyed and he stormed out the building. Now, at one point, the idea was definitely to turn Triple H as well to see if we could continue the feud with Austin, but flip the roles when Hunter decided he wanted to stay the bad guy. Okay then. Therefore, during Stone Cold versus The Rock, which we also did on TV and shall talk about later, Triple H did barge back in and he helped out the Rattlesnake. That's right. You could also get more confused because the King of Kings was the man who had ordered Rikishi to hit Austin with a car, the 1999 Survivor Series. As of today, though, please do not worry about it. Steve also fired back by dropping Triple H out of a crane later that year, so seeing them be buddy-buddy was super hard to accept, but there was a caveat. I was basically a fetus watching this, and man, because they look so cool, I decided they were cool. This was meant to run long as well until the horrible quad injury Triple H suffered in May. I mean, they were already the WWF and Intercontinental Champion, so oh, what could have been. The story was nonsense though, you can't argue that, although there is still a side of me that really wanted to see what the endgame was. And yes, that's another pun. Number 6, the Forgotten Match. So we did just mention this, but it does deserve its own entry because yeah, right after WrestleMania 17 on Raw, we had Steve Austin versus The Rock, the rematch. Furthermore, it was in a flubbing steel cage. It was a no contest due to the as-above Triple H interference as we made it clear Austin was our bad guy and The Rock was our good guy. Stone Cold's heel journey was going to be a mad one, but yeah, in terms of Rocky, he became super duper mega over. But worth your time because the crowd is so pumped for this, and I bet even if you were watching back in 2001, you don't remember it. And I didn't. I am stupid. I was genuinely surprised. It also sums up how mad these 12 months were too, and how WWE had plans to shift away from this feud. If this was the long-term arc, we would have held this off for sure. Well, maybe. We sort of did whatever we wanted during this time because we could. We talked about it, fans were going to turn up regardless. Number 5, RVD deserved a bigger push. So this one also ties into an earlier entry, but honestly, the moment he steps foot in the WWE, the fans go crazy for him. Now this cannot possibly just be down to the fact he was in ECW. Extreme Championship Wrestling was an important part of the landscape, but its appeal was niche. As soon as Rob Van Dam confirmed he was now on Raw, people just loved him. There's no waiting around for this either, because basically as soon as he had his first match with Matt Hardy in July, that was that. In unison, we all went, yep, that guy. It's why come No Mercy, he was in the ring with Steve Austin and Kurt Angle, but even then, he should have been kept to the top of the card if reactions were anything to go by. Throughout the whole year, they stayed consistently loud. It of course means the only answer is backstage politics. We will never know for sure, but the stories are out there and you are inclined to believe them. There's no other reason to not make RVD the guy. And yes, I know we did this at One Night Stand, but that was way too late. He was good to go from night number 1. Number 4, the comedy is great. The Steve Austin heel run is controversial, but man, did it prove that old Stone Cold was one hell of a sports entertainer. His skits with Kurt Angle are legendary, but there is so much more. The big chat before Team WWE versus Team WCW when Austin yells at The Undertaker in such a hilarious way, the dead man actually breaks. You also have Deborah being the ultimate deadpan sympathetic babyface, and then there's the hugs. Sometimes WWE's comedy is not good. That is not the case here. I think this all comes down to a simple switch too. It's not wrestling jokes, it's just jokes. At times it's almost like we're trying to make our backstage sketch shows, and while we love it more because of our fandom, it's good. It's very good. It's why I can never get too upset that Austin did go bad guy. Crazy paranoid playing the guitar Steve is a joy to watch. It's just a shame it didn't work out overall. Number 3, The Undertaker is sort of just there, which is weird, right? I don't even think it's his fault. I mean, let's take WrestleMania 17. Because due to all the madness, Vince McMahon forgot to book the Dead Man and Triple H on the show. That's actually the reason we got that match. Just stick them together. Maybe due to this as well, Taker goes on some sort of a unique quest as he fought RVD for the Hardcore title before that truly awful storyline with DDP and the Stalker. Honestly, it's even worse today than it was back then. He also works through the Invasion as a hardened soldier, but he does just ruin his opponents throughout 2001. And I tell you, after the 70-second destruction, it gets a bit old. It's why come the end of the year he goes heel because there wasn't much left for him to do. It could have been for overall fatigue given how long he had been around. 2002 onwards would be a little bit better. Number 2, Ric Flair's weird role. 24 hours after the 2001 Survivor Series and the WWF finally killing WCW, the story basically just continued. Ric Flair walked out on Raw and revealed that he had bought Shane and Stephanie McMahon's steak. That makes no sense. That's what Team WWF and Team Alliance were fighting over. It's also quite sad because why on earth was he not brought in to fight for WCW months earlier? We don't need to talk about it again, although I am going to, because it's still stupid. It was all to do with the fact we were about to split Raw and Smackdown with Vince managing one and Flair sorting out the other, but if you were a super nerd, there was still that question. You were Mr. WCW, why did you wait until the day after it all went bad? The debut is great because fans lose it, which is nice, but having him in this role sort of does make him feel like he's part of the background. Could have changed everything even if we had jumped the gun 4 weeks prior. It does feel like WWE was just doing whatever they could here though without any thought. And little did they know. Number 1, the necessary change. Which ties into my last point. You want to see the Attitude Era petering out? This is the year. Everything before WrestleMania 17 on Raw is just ridiculously enjoyable, and then you get out the other side as we do go deep into the Invasion story. Towards December, the direction was totally lost, to the point Smackdown became the show to watch. And trust me, that was never the idea. It always feels as if WWE should have felt this at the time, because when the changes do come in 2002, well, we know the deal there. We were going to go even further off the rails, as we chose to push the envelope way too far with some of the worst stories ever. Losing Steve Austin also didn't help. Clear when it all has just come to a screeching halt, though, and I'm sure those behind the scenes were panicking. The high times were over, although that is what happens. Wrestling is and always will be a roller coaster, which is why you just have to sit in the seat and see where the hell you end up.
If someone had told pro wrestling fans in 1999 that WCW and ECW would effectively be boiled down into factions on WWF television 2 years later, they'd have been laughed at probably. But business moves fast. That phrase also sums up the general feeling when poring over all 52 episodes of Smackdown from 2001. So I'm Gareth, this is WhatCulture Wrestling, and here are 10 things you learn binge-watching every WWE Smackdown from 2001. Number 10, the new set was instantly iconic. When people think of Smackdown, they think of this very set. That's a generational thing, of course, but the classic fist look has become synonymous with the Blue brand's identity, despite only being around for approximately 7 years. People still talk about it now, which says everything. Younger folks are probably bored of oldies talking about it, but they will never stop. The WWF changed from the Ovaltron to the fist look starting with the 16th of August 2001 episode. Salt Lake City had the pleasure of seeing it first, which is a nice little bit of trivia you can feel free to use with your wrestling pals. This show also took place just days before SummerSlam 2001, so management clearly weren't in the mood to wait until after a major pay-per-view. It was a vast, immediate improvement when binging, and the same could be said for some of the snazzy new graphics that flashed up on screen too. Now I want to know, what is your favourite wrestling set ever? Is it the big old fist or something else? You let me know in the comment section down below. Number 9, WWF booked a cool reason to change. This is something so many folks forget. Rhino was technically responsible for the aforementioned set change when he speared/gored Chris Jericho through the old entrance props on the 9th of August episode. His Wrecking Ball carnage was a neat way to destroy the old set and usher in a totally new one the next week. So there you go, on TV, it was Rhino who changed SmackDown history for the better. Thank you, sweet prince. Jericho's bump is kind of funny to look back on now too. The spear revealed that the set's centerpiece was just a tarp with some graphics projected onto it. It was nothing fancy at all, and certainly nothing as high-tech as what fans would expect today. In fact, it's almost charming how crap the whole thing was beneath all the flashing lights. Number 8, one of the best WCW title matches ever. Seeing WCW become a focal point on WWF television remains weird to watch to this day, but you've got to roll with it if you want to glean any enjoyment from the summer months. Thankfully, Booker T and Kurt Angle came along to remind everyone just how great they both were in ring during their respective primes. That pairing worked one hell of a WCW World title bout on the 26th of July Smackdown. There, a few days after Invasion, Angle beat Booker to bag the belt. Michael Cole and Jim Ross were phenomenal on commentary together. Honestly, I wish we'd heard more from them as a duo, and the live crowd was hot for a title switch. And oh, they got one, baby. Alliance and WWF locker rooms emptied for a big ringside brawl, and Stone Cold got involved near the finish. Absolutely all of it clicked and made for one seriously fun match that once again proved why Book was there to stay in the company. Actually, here's something else about that. Number 7, Booker T equals year-end MVP. Some of Booker's performances were unreal. That match versus Kurt Angle is a great example. His general freshness and vibe added so much to this product. A well-worked supermarket brawl with Austin on the 13th of December episode became one of the most cherished skits in Smackdown history. But the second half of Book's 2001 was more than that. He turned in some MVP showings on the blue brand, and that deserves more recognition. It didn't matter whether the promotion asked Booker to wrestle epic matches or make people laugh. He could do all of it, baby. That range helped him quickly bed in when other ex-WCW stars floundered. It cannot have been easy given all the upheaval. It's also important to applaud Book for matching the WWF's top names. And working with the likes of Angle, The Rock, and Stone Cold must have been a real thrill for someone who had been turned back into G.I. Bro on WCW television the year prior. Number 6, Kurt Angle could have been bigger as a babyface. Some out there might trick themselves into thinking Kurt Angle only got over as a babyface due to the widespread patriotism post 9/11, but that is wide of the mark. The truth is, he was over as a baby months before that, but the WWF never really seemed comfortable pushing him as the top good guy on the roster. Creative could have done more with him, to be honest. Angle toned down his goofiest character traits to exhibit a serious badass athlete persona, and people were super into it. Crowds popped huge for his ankle lock finish, and Angle, Angle, Angle chants were booming when reliving some episodes. Honestly, they were loud. It's fun to imagine what might have been possible had the writers continued exploring Kurt Angle top babyface in 2001. Credit must also go to Kurt for slotting right back into a heel role once the WWF got bored of his American hero act and reverted to type. He did not miss a step. What a pro. Cheers for checking out this video today, folks. Hit that subscribe button down below for more of this WhatCulture wrestling stuff in your life. Number 5, Triple H made Jeff Hardy a single star. Much was made of the vicious beatdown Triple H and Steve Austin dished out to the Hardys and Lita on Raw in early April. Lita taking some steel chair shots was an understandably sensitive topic at the time, but Team Extreme would get revenge days later on Smackdown courtesy of Jeff Hardy. Hunter's part in all of this should not be overlooked too. Jeff beat Trips for the Intercontinental title on the 12th of April Smackdown. Despite being formatted as a lengthy beatdown with a babyface comeback, Triple H showed some selflessness by presenting Hardy as a never say die kind of hero throughout the match. It worked and proved Jeff had it in him to be a single star. Some fans had been on the fence about that beforehand, largely because the Hardys had been such a popular unit. Splitting them up just seemed daft, but Jeff holding the IC belt for a few days proved to be a successful experiment, and precursor of things to come for him. You could say Hunter gave Jeff a foot up the ladder that night. Number 4, 6 of the TLC 3 crew still wrestle. What crosses your mind when you think of TLC 3? Chris Benoit's grim story is a likely sticking point for many when they ponder sitting down to watch it again, which is fair enough really. Something completely different popped into this fan's head though. How many of those involved still wrestle today? Edge, Christian, Chris Jericho, and both Hardy brothers all work in AEW, and they're all very much still an important part of weekly pro wrestling TV. Meanwhile, Bubba Ray Dudley still wrestles too, and occasionally pops up as a WrestleMania special guest referee. That's a staggering thought, not least upon viewing the car crash bumps. These guys are lucky they can even walk in 2024, let alone work high quality matches. The third TLC bout has always stuck out as odd compared to the first pair. It happened on free-to-air programming for a start, but also added a fourth team into the mix for even more mayhem. Shoot back to the 24th of May 2001 episode if you fancy checking it out. You will not be disappointed, folks. Number 3, there's a hardcore match you need to see. You will not be let down by this cracker either. The Rock and Rob Van Dam had another scorcher on Raw about a month or so before this one. Both are definitely well worth seeing, but choose the 25th of October Smackdown offering if you like the quirky flavor of seeing Rocky challenge for the lowly hardcore title. That did not happen every day, you know. Van Dam, like Booker T before him, had quickly settled into life as a WWF star. By October, people were calling for him to become a permanent headliner, and bouts like this one show exactly why. RVD's unique style captivated fans, and he was helped by top names like The Rock selling hard for him. Interesting combos like Rock versus RVD is why binging on SmackDown's 2001 lineup is honestly a proper treat to look forward to. Who doesn't want to see The Rock take a Van Daminator or 6A? Both of these guys are absolutely one of a kind. Number 2, how did they keep a straight face? Comedy can fall flat in wrestling. Some, like Santino Marella or The Rock, did/do it incredibly well. Others, well, not so much. So the WWF was running a risky play by by sticking a freshly turned heel Steve Austin on TV alongside Kurt Angle and having them act like Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly in Step Brothers. Add Vince McMahon into the equation mid-WCW invasion, and you had a possible recipe for disaster. Almost unbelievably though, Austin experienced a new lease of life as a guitar-playing, gift-giving goof who caused his wife Deborah to sigh and eye-roll weekly. And Deborah deserves a special mention too, because she was often the voice of reason grounding these skits. Nobody cracked once, not even once. Lord only knows how everyone managed to keep a straight face when Angle put on his tiny cowboy hat and bickered with Austin about everything under the damn sun. It was hilarious stuff, and helped feed into Kurt's babyface turn to boot. Number 1, it's easy to forget all of Austin's turns. As this entry title suggests, it's pretty easy to forget many of the story beats following Austin's heel turn at WrestleMania X7. Technically, Steve Austin turned no less than 4 times that year. He went from babyface to heel at Mania, heel to baby before Invasion, baby to heel at Invasion, then eventually returned to being an anti-hero again by the end of 2001. It was exhausting to keep up as creatives stumbled around. Seeing Austin don WCW t-shirts and come out to that less energetic, disturbed entrance theme is flat out strange looking back. It's understandable that Stone Cold had to move with the times and all, but fans still weren't done rooting for him and didn't know what to make of him sporting WCW colours. This was not what most live crowds wanted from Austin at all. The WWF didn't seem convinced by any of it either, which must be why they flip-flopped Steve between baby and heel and vice versa way too many times throughout that year. What a strange old time, eh?
The Attitude Era is always going to be, for some, the greatest time in pro wrestling. If you were a child growing up with this, it was like all your dreams had come true. Constant chaos through the art of violence. What else do you need? It was a long old time ago though, and times have changed, so what can we learn today from binge watching the WWF from 1997 to 2002? Sit down with me, Simon Miller, my friends, and let's find out. Number 30, the first pay-per-view within the era wasn't great. I mean, at the time, I don't think WWE even knew they'd entered a new era. That's why going back is so interesting. You can see the two periods merging together. If we do see the Montreal Screwjob at the 1997 Survivor Series as the unofficial starting point though, the next pay-per-view on the calendar was In Your House Degeneration X. It really wasn't that good. You get an 8-match card with 4 finishes being disqualifications, and the main event is Shawn Michaels versus Ken Shamrock for the WWF title. Now, Ken deserved this. The man should have been moved into the position permanently, but go and watch it now. You will see. For whatever reason, he was treated as the guy just below. Makes no sense, we need new stars. Goldust also cuts a promo halfway through where he recites Dr. Zeus. That kind of sort of sums it up. Number 29, the next one was way better, because it was the 1998 Royal Rumble. Talk about the WWF picking their new direction and moving forward. There's a real sense of danger to the whole thing, especially as new star Stone Cold Steve Austin enters the Rumble with a target on his head. The whole roster wanted to get rid of him, as Austin had run roughshod through the whole company. Goldust vs. Vader is also an underrated gem, whereas The Rock and Ken Shamrock were having a great feud. And yes, it's around this time when that chair shot happened. No wonder Ken wanted to kill him. You also get the now iconic Shawn Michaels and Undertaker casket match, and while Shawn would get seriously hurt during it, the match itself is really good. And it ends with Kane setting his fake brother on fire. Allegedly. And sure, that was a little bit too much, but again, it was showing you what the plan was going to be moving forward. No more kiddie TV, no more mucking around. The wheels were coming off, and if you didn't like it, tough. The irony being that everybody liked it. Numbers were about to soar. Number 28, In Your House stayed around for ages. Most people feel like the In Your House pay-per-view experiment was done with by 1998, but it's not true. Even the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1999 had the branding before it. Vince McMahon had introduced the whole thing in 1995 as a way to expand pay-per-view output. The whole reason for the name was to charge less. Then business picked up, and all of a sudden, all pay-per-views were the same price. It's such a strange thing to see, though, as I don't think the company made a set decision for ages. Ground Zero in September 1997 doesn't have the In Your House branding, and that was 2 months before the Bret and Shawn explosion. It sort of underlines that WWF weren't overly prepared for this boom and flew by the seat of their pants for a bit. Can't really fault it, though. Even if this was the strategy, the company were about to make record profits. Number 27, Kane felt out of place place. For some, not me, it's the best debut ever, but I get it. There were a contingent of fans who after Bad Blood 1997 didn't get it. Most did agree that his arrival was awesome, especially as Paul Bearer had been talking about him for ages. But actually, look at the presentation. Kane was a cartoon-like figure which was more suited to the mid-90s WWF, where everybody was meant to be over the top. Because the big red machine had such an edge to him though, it was almost like a nice halfway house. We're embracing the new, but if you like the old, don't worry, we're still gonna have these mad personas. Really, it's more of a critic and praising of WWE. If more of their gimmicks were treated with this sort of respect, then they would have been fine. The problem was in 1995 especially, they all got sold like a joke. If the company is telling you that, oh yeah, you're gonna think the same. Number 26, The Rock's rise was crazy. Because it didn't work at first. Even The Undertaker has admitted to this. He saw a young Rocky Maivia walk into the ring in 1996 and thought he was doomed. Not quite. I mean, he would have been if we hadn't have changed track, but we did. After The Rock hurt his knee, he returned as a bad guy with a very real justification. Before he left, the fans were telling him to die. Yeah, I get it. From the moment he joins the nation in 1997, though, my gosh, he is leading the group within weeks, the Intercontinental Champion soon after, and within 18 months, is main eventing WrestleMania against Steve Austin. This wasn't a, well, we may as well do something either. The man earned his spot. The real catalyst was the 1998 Survivor Series when the Big Ruse was revealed. The Great One had been working with the McMahons all along. It helped so much, though, as that top heel spot was open, and as soon as Dwayne Johnson stepped into it, was no going back. Within 4 years, he was off making movies. Oh yeah, it's just the craziest of rises. He could not be stopped. Number 25, the 1998 King of the Ring. So it is back to the Ken Shamrock loving now. Sorry, but go watch this time for yourself and you will see it too. Now, the argument has always been The Rock should have got the nod at the 1998 King of the Ring, but I disagree. We just talked about how he did. Everything was totally fine. The frustrating aspect here was that even though Ken got the win, once again, we didn't go all in. Jim Ross on his podcast has hinted at this. It sounds like it came down to Shamrock's tardiness. He would often be late to events, or to use JR words, the company couldn't rely on him. You need that if you're going to make somebody the WWF champion. They must have wanted to at least try because Ken did beat The Rock in the finals, but it is so crazy watching it now. You could have had 2 new stars, but it never happened. Not that long afterwards, Shamrock was gone, and he went back to MMA, which in hindsight is total madness. Number 24, the pay-per-view started to feel like TV. This is why pay-per-views fell off a cliff in the 2010s. WWE thought sticking to this format was the best, but as television wasn't as exciting as it was in the Attitude Era, all the specialness went out of the window. It sucked. By late 1998, WWE had decided the Raw format needed to be everywhere, to the point wrestlers would cut promos and leave and come back for their match later on, even though we were watching a pay-per-view. You also got loads more backstage segments and impromptu matches, meaning sometimes you dropped your money and didn't know what you were going to get. I mean, that's bonkers. It's a massive reason why I'm glad it's gone today, because pay-per-views need to feel separate and like something big is coming. I mean, after all, we do get Raw and Smackdown every single week. Number 23, Stone Cold Steve Austin drops the belt for 24 hours in 1998. Kinda ties in. For WWE thought a great way to spike TV ratings would be for Austin to lose the first blood match to Kane and his world championship at the King of the Ring, hoping people would watch Raw to see what the hell happened. They were correct. The reason it makes you roll your eyes today is because Stone Cold had only won the title at WrestleMania after a huge chase, and now we've gone and done this. It was weird. Aside from the obvious, it's not like the product was calling out for it at the time either. Fans loved Austin being the man, and Kane had it all even without the gold. I suppose it did keep people on their toes because it underlined that anything could happen at any time. From a 2024 vantage point though, you can see right through it. It was a pretty shallow decision. Number 22, you should watch Capital Carnage. Mostly because it was one of the first WWE events I ever went to. That's because it was from Britain. It was also during a time where I don't think the company knew what they wanted to do in the UK, so they sort of did these odd tailor-made shows. Capital Carnage wins out because while it's still clearly not important in terms of overall stories, everyone just seems to try a little bit harder. The Rock and X-Pac of all people have a banger, and the four-way between Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Undertaker, Kane, and Mankind was a dream at the time. Here's all your favorite stars, and we are throwing them into one match. You also get nonsense with Vinnie Jones and Gerald Briscoe giving him a red card, because of course if you are in England, we must all play soccer. And hey, look, it's fun, so at least you'll get a laugh out of it. Number 21, the Backlash rematch. The WrestleMania 15 match between Steve Austin and The Rock is great. Of course it is. It ties into their Mania trilogy. That is all time. When you go through this whole time period, though, I tell you, the Backlash 1999 rematch is awesome, and maybe even better than the one at the Show of Shows. First of all, it has a no-holds-barred stipulation, so they do go nuts. But also, by this point, Steve and Rocky had perfected what was going to be the main event style for a while. You also get The Rock adding in his mini bits such as stealing cameras, and really the feud works as a sliding scale. They start off good and just get better and better and better. Shane McMahon as a special guest referee totally understands the assignment, so this is an underrated gem. So if you do have 25 minutes today, I think you should sit down and watch it. Number 20, Billy Gunn was an odd choice. King of the Ring, 1999. Billy Gunn wins, and it's clear he's next in line for a singles push. I get it. For starters, he was mega over as one half of the New Age Outlaws, but also, this man is huge. Nobody understands it until you meet him. He was going to fit right in. The problem was, it came from nowhere. There was no careful planning or the planting of seeds. Somebody just woke up one day and went, yep, that's the way to go. It's why there is surprise from the fans that you can feel through the TV, and he gets no help at all. WWE kept putting him in situations where he was always going to have his back against a wall. There's no wonder it didn't click. With a bit more thought, there's no reason why Gunn couldn't have been fine with this, but instead, we got The Rock to verbally destroy him and then silently put him back to where he was before. It's just good times. Number 19, things are messy in late 99. So the last quarter of WWE in 1999 is fine. It's not the word many associate with the company here though, but it does feel like they hit a bit of a reset once 2000 rolled around. Now it's not bad, but as Austin versus McMahon was sort of out of ideas, Vince gets into it with The Undertaker and Triple H, which just isn't as good, whereas the rest of the stories in the mid-card dry up completely. Because I love D'Lo Brown and Midian, but they are just thrown together at fully loaded because we needed something to do. Again, we're not talking falling off a cliff here, but there is more of a jolt than you may remember, and it means once the millennium arrived, yeah, you could see it, we had to shuffle the deck a bit. Number 18, The Big Show as champion, which is not well timed. In fact, his whole debut is a little bit off. I mean, Paul White, as he was known at first, accidentally helped Steve Austin win during his cage match with Vince McMahon at the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And then as the boss was feuding with Triple H in late 1999, the newly named The Big Show became the WWE champion. Kind of feels like we're pulling at straws. Now, obviously this happened because McMahon loves big guys, but Show hadn't really clicked with the new audience yet. And when he does get the title at the Survivor Series, it is so rushed. Then you have that crazy big boss man feud. There's no plan here. I think truthfully at the time, the audience just didn't see him at that level of The Rock or Stone Cold, so it was a very hard sell. There's way more to this when you do the research, because yeah, everything Vince McMahon said he wouldn't do with a giant, he went and did anyway. Whoops. Number 17, that old Madison Square Garden setup is the absolute best. I imagine many fans don't remember this now, but before MSG had its big upgrade, the entranceway for WWF shows was the tiny aisle that was drowning with fans. It was great. It sort of does look like shows from 2024 in the sense WWE has reduced the side of its entranceway to fit more fans in, but go and watch SummerSlam 1998 or the Royal Rumble during the Attitude Era. You don't need Jim Ross telling you where we are. You can see it. It just allows it to stand out, which is why the current shift is a plus for sure. Atmosphere above everything, and MSG from the late 90s had all of that and more. I do think it was a little bit special. Number 16, the WrestleMania 2000 main event, which was totally wrong. I'm still not sure why WWE decided to do this, other than the fact they wanted to have a McMahon in every corner. The much more sensible main event was Triple H versus The Rock, because with Steve Austin out injured, they were our new guys. That's why we ran that match 1 month after this. Amazingly, WrestleMania was used to do the more gimmicky idea. But it did mean Stephanie McMahon was supporting the game, Linda brought Mick Foley into the mix, Shane was backing the Big Show, with Vince McMahon behind The Rock. that doesn't make any sense. It's also just not what people wanted to see, and while it was great that Foley got his moment, in terms of the booking, this is way more complicated than it needed to be. Number 15, that Undertaker return is crazy. Judgment Day 2000 was bonkers anyway, as our main event was the just mentioned Triple H versus The Rock in an Iron Man match. As they didn't want to copy what Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart had done years prior, you get all the falls and a huge surprise at the end, the return of the Dead Man. Although he wasn't the Dead Man anymore. The thing is, WWE had serious timing issues, so even when the Phenom is riding to the ring, the camera work is all over the place, and nobody knows what the hell is happening. Then the Undertaker is the biker version, which makes it even more nuts. You kinda feel like you've taken drugs. It is absolutely awesome though, do not get me wrong, and sort of sums up what the Attitude Era is. Utter insanity. Fans lose it too, which you can see when you watch this footage. There's a few people in the front row that almost fall over because they're jumping around so much. So I doubt we'll ever get a comeback like this again because it's a giant accident in many ways. But also, I will let you know this, it is great. Number 14, 2000 is fine, even without Stone Cold Steve Austin. Because there was serious worry when Austin needed neck surgery because, of course, he was the WWF's biggest draw by a mile. The whole company at that time had been built off his back. He did get run over at the Survivor Series, though, and we weren't going to see him for ages, so fair play to everybody else involved. They realized they needed to step up, and they did. The year 2000 is one of the most successful on record for the promotion. That's because we understood what to do. Build as many people up as possible to make up for the absence. It's why the WWF having The Rock was so important, because he moved into this position effortlessly. The audience loved him too, so they could handle missing the rattlesnake for a while. And actually, yeah, when you go back through it now, I don't think any of this could have gone any better. Number 13, the six-man Hell in a Cell. So the WWF actually booked themselves into a corner with this. Because the main reason Armageddon 2000 does indeed end with a six-way Hell in a Cell is because we had to increase the intensity constantly. It's what the fans had come to expect. Somehow WWE was always up to the task though, and man, this is awesome. The star power is also crazy as it's world champion Kurt Angle versus The Rock versus Steve Austin versus The Undertaker versus Triple H versus Ricochet. That's like doing the same today, but it's Roman Reigns versus Randy Orton versus Cody Rhodes versus Seth Rollins versus CM Punk versus Drew McIntyre. Don't you tell a lie to me, you would lose it. It's so much fun as well, and having Angle somehow hold on to his world title is joyous. How on earth did he pull this off? You also get Big Quiche being thrown off the cell into a hay mobile for some reason, but it actually adds to it. While this was overkill in many ways, it is executed near perfectly. It's another match you should probably go and watch. Number 12, Kurt Angle is awesome. And given we have just talked about him, yeah, you do not get how good Kurt Angle is until you go back and remind yourself. He only debuts in 1999, and by 2000 he's on top of the company, but it is more than deserved. People like to say today that so-and-so has had a Kurt Angle rise. They didn't, my friend. Nobody has ever done it like this. The Olympic gold medalist also figured out his character and promos within weeks while just having the best matches. I mean, he really is one of the best to ever do it. So yeah, let's not get it twisted. It is the rookie years of all rookie years. And given what wrestling is today, this may never be topped. Number 11, WrestleMania 17 is amazing, but maybe not the best WrestleMania ever. I mean, that is going to be debated forever, and again, it is so good. The main event is all time, and you have the TLC match, which will live for eternity. Even the long-forgotten Triple H versus Undertaker fight rules, they kick each other's ass. When you go through the whole thing top to bottom, however, not everything is 5-star amazing. Dare I say it, if you compare it to a Mania 39 or 40, there's a chance in terms of the whole card, the latter shows are better. Again, only you can decide, but it's not as cut and dry as some people make out. The ending will be another chatting point until we're all dead because Stone Cold Steve Austin does turn heel, but let's be honest, it wasn't the right move. Even Austin knows that. He is no fool. Number 10, the WCW stuff sucks. And we all know this too. Now do not forget, the WWF bought World Championship Wrestling in 2001, so the Attitude Era is very much alive. What should have been the catalyst to extend this run, though, quickly becomes a dud for one very specific reason. WCW is treated like a joke. From the moment Lance Storm does his run-in to kick off the invasion, the message is so damn clear. As we've been telling you throughout the Monday Night Wars, WWF rules and WCW sucks. Well, how am I meant to take all of this seriously then? If anything, it's a reason the Attitude Era ends sooner than maybe it should have done, because you get 6 months of utter destruction with no real payoff. go watch The Undertaker vs. DDP, you will just be sad. The roster is also rammed to the nines at this point, so trying to get everybody on is next to impossible. And honestly, as popular as it is, 2001 really is quite the strange year. Number 8, the Invasion pay-per-view card. So this carries on too. While the Invasion show did do an amazing buy rate, the card is just all over the place. RVD vs. Jeff Hardy was the right sort of matchup, but William Regal vs. Raven was just a WWF bout in all but name, as was Taz vs. Tajiri. This was not the WCW influence we had hoped for. APA vs. Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Hare was better, but they weren't the stars we needed them to be. The whole thing feels like watching a random episode of Raw. Somebody really should have just given the money to a Hulk Hogan, Bill Goldberg, or Sting, especially as they came in eventually anyway. But yeah, you likely already know this. It's just such a disappointment. I mean, this did 800,000 buys, and if you had got any of those dudes, I tell ya, it would have smashed through 1 million. Number 8, a lot of shows were all about the main event, which was the reverse of WCW, really. They had built up a reputation of having a great mid-card but a stupid main event, whereas the WWF went the other way. It was all about the closer. Because if I do throw pay-per-views like Over the Edge 1998 or the St. Valentine's Day Massacre at you, I bet you think of Austin vs. Dude Love or Stone Cold vs. McMahon. But does anything else come to mind? No, it does not. Even SummerSlam 1998 is heavily remembered for Austin vs. The Undertaker, and it's the same for the Survivor Series. That was the night The Rock went super heel. You cannot fault the approach because it worked, but we are talking about binge watching here. Some of the other matches are honestly just there because we have to go and fill 3 hours. It is another reason why maybe, just maybe, WWE is a little bit better today. It's far better balanced from top to bottom. And now I'll let you argue that in the comments. Number 7, RVD was ready to be champion in 2001. Off fan reactions alone. Didn't matter who else got brought in. As soon as Rob Van Dam was live, the WWE fans loved him. Talk about being instantly over. I'm sure a huge reason for this was because he was ahead of his time, but honestly, somebody had made a random call in 2001 and made him the world champion, nobody would have minded. The pop alone would have proved it. The issue was the powers that be weren't sure they could rely on him in that top position, because yeah, it does come with certain responsibilities. That's why in 2006 when we did crown him, well, you know, damn it. You can also throw the likes of Jeff Hardy into this same category a few years later because, yeah, RVD did get in trouble with the cops, and when WWE stripped him of the titles, he never really got another shot. Disappointing, really. Not like other people at the top of the card hadn't had their own problems before. Number 6, Booker T's big comeback. Booker T sort of came away unscathed from the Buff Bagwell match in July 2001 when WCW was meant to take over Raw, but still. Apparently those behind the curtain were going to be dubious regardless, and we've talked about this. Even the wrestlers bought into this war. Anybody from the other side must be judged. Thankfully, soon after this we got to SummerSlam where Booker T took on The Rock, and yeah, it was obvious. The man with the T was going to be just fine. He got it. It was the main event as well due to the fact Rocky was going to win the WCW title, but it still meant Booker had to deliver and he was more than fine. Looked like he'd been part of the WWF for years. I would also imagine he got the nod from the Great One too, and from there he never looked back. His peak in the company was going to be way after the Attitude Era was done, but it starts here for sure. Number 5, it is over by 2002. Some will say the latter part of 2001 is already when WWE was losing its momentum, but when you get to 2002, yeah, there is no debate. There's no real reason other than the fact whatever goes up must come down. Without the WCW competition, Vince McMahon and co. indeed do start to rest on their laurels. They won. Let's chill out for a bit. Even programs that are clearly good like The Rock vs. Chris Jericho suffer due to the overall downturn, and elsewhere nothing was standing out. This is really when the company should have shifted gears, but instead they just got more crazy. Soon after, they would be doing the Triple H and Kane stuff. You know what? Let's not talk about it. Number 14, WrestleMania 18 is a weird show. So obviously people just want to talk about The Rock vs. Hulk Hogan when Mania 18 is mentioned, and yeah, we should. It's one of the most iconic matches of all time. When you watch it today, though, the whole show is just weird. Chris Jericho vs. Triple H for the world title is ruined by trying to follow this, but also the feud is more Hunter vs. Stephanie McMahon, with Jericho being the third wheel. How did that happen? The Undertaker versus Ric Flair is okay, but not quite the barn burner it should have been. And then there's odd matches like Kane versus Kurt Angle and Edge versus Booker T. We mentioned that one as the winner got to do a Japanese shampoo commercial. Great. The point is, if you removed Hulk and Rock, it wouldn't really feel like a Mania card, especially as their biggest star, Steve Austin, was in a nothing feud with Scott Hall. So I tell you, my friends, not good. Number 3, let's talk about Chris Jericho, because it does deserve more than just a throwaway sentence. That man was done dirty. It was great when he won the world title at Vengeance 2001 by beating Stone Cold and The Rock in one night because WWE needed new stars. Jericho had more than proved himself. From that moment on, though, we treated him like a number 2, and it was ridiculous. The relationship with Stephanie McMahon doesn't help at all, and from the moment Triple H returned in January, he may as well have had a sign that said, "I am going to win that belt." Chris felt like dead man walking. Jericho has talked about this too and agrees because the tone is just wrong. We have seen this happen with other wrestlers as well over the years. Maybe it did start with Y2J, because if you're going to crown someone for the love of everything, just go all the way. Number 2, the last pay-per-view, which I think is likely Backlash 2002. Of course, you can argue it. It means the Attitude Era goes away with the strangest scene, as despite the big push for Triple H to win the title, he faces Hulk Hogan here, and he loses. Good grief. This was off the back of Mania 18 and the crazy reaction Hogan got, but that just meant the last thing he needed was to be the champion. He could have ridden that wave for ages, but moving him into this position caused so many issues that eventually saw Hulk leave the company again. To end this time period as well with Hulkamania running wild again, well, I suppose there's a certain poeticness to it, but it also sums up that WWE was panicking a bit. They saw the numbers and were searching for whatever would work, and I don't know, man, going back to 1987 probably wasn't the best move. Number 1, Insurrection 2002's historical moment. So if we do stick to the timeline before the Attitude Era had left us, WWE hopped across the pond to give the UK another Insurrection pay-per-view. They used to bounce between this name and Rebellion. It's another thing that was quite weird. It happened on the 4th of May in London, and yes, I was there. And the reason we have to mention it is because this is indeed the last event where the initials WWF were above the marquee. 2 days later, we were going to change forever after the Pandas brought a lawsuit to Vince McMahon's door. Jump forward to the 6th of May Raw and we got the F out. So, in terms of the final pay-per-view match of this era, it's The Undertaker versus Triple H. And again, I saw this live. It was all right. Do you know of anything else that you took away when you maybe binge-watched the Attitude Era? Then please let us know in the comments below before you like, share, and subscribe. Then you can hit that video on the screen for another walk down memory lane. But otherwise, my friends, thank you very much for joining me today, and I look forward to talking to you again very, very soon.